Well, welcome everyone to our next in our series of webinars on COVID-19 from Southbury Economic Development. Today's topic is finances and cash flow. And I'm very pleased to have with me two special guests, Dawn Reshendodi and Louis Silva. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about them, if I may. So Dawn Reshendodi has been managing businesses for 30 years, and during that time has handled the financial affairs of dozens of corporations, publishing houses, and individuals. Ms. Reshendodi joined Benet in 1990 after working several years with the Travelers Relocation Division of General Electric as a relocation specialist for the Asian business community. Prior to that, she worked for the international real estate firm Julian Studley as assistant manager of their Asian division. She previously managed the New York office of Fujitsu Limited. Dawn became the CEO of Benet Enterprises Incorporated in 2010 upon the retirement of her business partner and father, Neil Reshen, founder of Benet. She's also the founding partner and publisher for For Beginners LLC, the publishers of the For Beginners series, a graphic nonfiction book line. Prior to 1985, Ms. Reshendodi lived in Japan and worked for the Japanese Ministry of Education as a grammar school teacher, where she was able to expand her knowledge of Japan and the Japanese language. We will, of course, expect her to demonstrate that during this webinar. She holds a BS in Foreign Service from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and was a White House intern to Thomas Beard, special assistant to President Jimmy Carter. So we welcome Dawn. Dawn, thanks for joining us. And before I leave this page, I want to introduce our other special guest, Louis Silva, who's Vice President with the Community Investment Corporation, or CIC. In his role, Louis is responsible for economic development financing through the administration of the SBA 504 loan program and various other SBA loans. And prior to joining CIC, Louis spent 10 years working in the banking industry, where he served in several capacities within the retail operations and commercial sectors of banking. So with that, I want to again say hello to Louis and Dawn.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Louis.
And now, if I may, I'd like to just dive into our topic of why we are talking about this, why we're talking about finances and cash flow. We conducted a survey of the businesses in Southbury a few weeks back that went about 3 weeks. We actually did a webinar on the results of that survey. And in those survey results, we saw that the overarching pressing need was cash flow. Part of that, of course, was just the uncertainty of how long it was going to take to reopen and get back to, and then even once opening, how long to get back to a cash flow that they were used to. Approximately 78% of our businesses that took the survey applied for one or more of the assistance programs, such as the PPP or the EIDL. And as indicated, about 20% felt they had operating capital to go for the length of 6 months. While we're on that mention of PPP, I did want to say that the deadline to apply for PPP loan that's still available is June 30th, so it is right around the corner. I know we'll be talking a little bit about that here, but there is a link on the screen for that. I do want to say, speaking of that link, that I will be providing a information sheet to everybody that participates in this webinar and everybody that signs up for the webinar series with all of the applicable links and resources that we will talk about during the course of this webinar to share with you, so that you can have that as a reference. So if you can't write all that down while you see it on the screen, don't worry about that. So with that, I am going to do this now that we've sort of set the stage for this topic. And I'm going to pass the baton to Dawn Reshendodi to tell us her experiences within this pandemic and this climate, and what she's been doing in her work with Benet. So Dawn?
Oh, well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. Obviously, it's been a really unexpected and crazy time. So for us, we have clients in various industries. So the legal industry, publishing, nonprofit, SaaS, other industries, and no one could have anticipated this. So to have a total shutdown, regardless of how well positioned people were, to have the tap turned off so quickly was devastating. So we spent, I would say, the first 4 weeks plus, and we're still doing it, filing PPP, EIDL, everything for every client we could, scouring every grant, every loan that was possible, because people were not aware of how long this would last. They still are not aware, and the status of their own customers. So obviously, if you were in a storefront, your business was closed right away. For many other businesses, some of it went on as usual. People for the first few weeks were very concerned, and so there was a severe drop in business. But for our clients, we didn't realize how essential, but we should have known, bookkeeping and managing financials were. So when our clients needed to file, we were able to do that for all of our clients within hours of the information coming out. And that was because we had up-to-date balance sheet, income statement, payroll records, assets, liabilities, banking information at hand. So we became an essential resource for our clients, which was great. So everyone was able to get PPP. Some of it took longer than others. Everyone was able to get EIDL and other grants, HEDCO, other things. And we have clients throughout the US and the UK. So people within the United States were applying in many areas. We had one particular client who could not get it for the life of us. And we were able to find a commercial broker that shifted his business in Long Island to just aiding on behalf of the government, businesses finding PPP that didn't have traditional banking relationships. So it's been a very tumultuous time, very stressful for our staff, but really for our clients, who were not sure how they would weather this storm. Many who did not see a downturn were surprised, but all of them learned a lot about planning for disasters, pandemics or otherwise, and to talk about what Lewis will, I'm sure, get into. They realized the thing that I've been saying for years: cash flow is king, right? Having enough money in the bank set aside, whether liquid or almost liquid, to weather any sort of storm. For many people who experienced the hurricanes in the Northeast a few years ago, they realized that, but no one could see a nationwide shutdown like this. So remembering cash flow is king, having your financials ready. I do know of businesses that, because they were behind in filing their taxes, were not in good standing with the state, other issues, didn't have payroll records, really had difficulty applying for PPP grants, loans, if at all. So I think the financial preparedness is key. All of us are talking about it now in this industry. And if people are looking for funds, grants, as with Lewis's organization and others, CEDF, to name one, they've got to be prepared.
Dawn, you've referenced some of the work you've been doing with your clients and with your business, Vinay. What I'd like to do at this point is jump over to and share with everyone a little brochure of your company, so that they have a frame of reference of the work that you do at Vinay and how it integrates into the topic we're talking about right now.
Well, what we say is we do all the things that business owners hate to do. So we handle all of their back office, bookkeeping, and financial affairs. That's accounts payable, paying their bills, receivables, doing their invoicing, collecting, payroll, HR, benefits, and then financial reporting on steroids. Mm-hmm. So that's really what we do. For our clients, when it came time to prepare all of the PPP and grants, we did that for them. So they were able to focus on their business, growing their business, extending their reach, while we were doing all of those applications. And that was for every client throughout the United States.
So obviously, yes. So for the clients that you were working with, and I would assume that the work that you did specifically regarding the pandemic and applying for PPP were for existing clients. Did you find, as a result, an uptick in clients? Like, did you find people saying, boy, you know what, this is a kind of a service I could use, because as I approached my situation with the application process and trying to figure this out, manage this, I would just be so great if I could just sort of hand this over. Did you find it to be a growth opportunity there, or is it really just hunkering down and just working with those existing clients?
Well, I think we have been approached by several clients who now realize that, unfortunately, you can't do that overnight, right? So we do have clients who come to us for cleanups. We have somebody who approached us because of the PPP who hadn't really had control of their financials for a couple of years. So that process is not going to be an overnight. What it did show to us is that, and to our clients, right, that being on top of your financials, having everything at your financial fingertips, and being prepared, excuse me, to literally fill out any of those applications within an hour of getting them is tremendous. And so that showed a great value for our services and has made us more invaluable and essential to our clients. And I think that as people realize this, they're going to make the decision that being on top of your financials, having bookkeeping is an important part of any business, and waiting to the last minute is a crucial mistake. So when people are looking for funding, as they do with CIC, CEDF, and other organizations, they will impose that financial discipline on you in order for you to succeed. But it takes time. So pulling together your payroll records, if you haven't stayed on top of it, maybe that information is at your office, you're locked out, you can't reach it. If you don't have everything on a dashboard or on the cloud, makes it very, very hard to play catch up. So for us, it was a reinforcement of our value, and also it was a great test run for our business to say, can we run 100% virtually, which we can, and that will lead into some questions about the value of commercial real estate and offices down the road, and also what are the strengths and weaknesses, a SWOT, analysis of our situation, the opportunities and the threats. So it's left us in a very, very secure position, both in the marketplace and well as financially. So because our clients were doing well for the most part, organized, and to the best extent they could be prepared, we really did not see any that had a huge downturn. And once they received PPP funds, they were able to keep going. So our clients have been, going forward and doing well, and we're very pleased and honored to be working for them.
Did you find anybody who were concerned about, say, the PPP funds? Because I know early on there was concern as to, how long is it going to take to bring back our employees? And therefore, does it make sense to apply for a PPP loan if we don't envision us actually bringing people back to work, and then therefore we'd get this loan and we wouldn't be able to use it as it was intended, because at the onset it was, 75% had to be used for payroll and related expenses. Right. So did you find people hesitant, and then did you have to then advise them accordingly? And then as things continued to change, as they did, then did that recommendations perhaps change? And I know I've spoken to at least one individual who received the PPP and then didn't think they could actually apply it and returned it. Then the rules changed and loosened the Flexibility Act, and now they would like to reapply, and they're having difficulty doing that. So that's one of the reasons I bring it up.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So we had several clients at the beginning who thought, not sure if we need it. And our advice had been, because everything was so fluid in terms of the regulations, no one knew how long it would take to get the funding, and some got it very, very late. We said apply, and as things progress, we can make decisions, right? So we can auto-correct as we go along. For many of those clients who thought they might not need it, within a few weeks, they started to get panicky and thought, yeah, I'm gonna need it. And so we had one who said, they weren't sure if they would need it, got the funding, and now that the rules have changed, and when the repayment comes, they may give it back, right? No harm, no foul. But they had that cushion there, and that's what we said to our clients. Really important to have the ability to make those decisions. And we had one client in particular that had very difficult time getting PPP and needed it for rent, right? So their payroll was not the issue, very high rent area. And in the interim, they were able to make deals with their landlord for, and on at the back end of the lease, add on the rent that was missing, discounted, things like that.
Right.
But once they got it, it was a godsend because some of them, New York, other cities, LA, they're still closed. So they really needed that assistance. And the funding that the government has given is more reasonable than you're going to find, unfortunately, at any bank, right? We're talking about either 0, 1%, 3%. Most people, especially the type of small businesses, maybe not great or long banking relationships. As Lewis knows, you're not going to be able to get those sorts of rates. So my advice was, and I think it's turned out to be true, apply for the funding, see what happens. So we were literally setting up the PPP calculations as the regulations came through, updating them with projections, right? So payroll that occurred, plugging that in, rent, plugging in a projection, and then of course everything changed from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. Right. So a lot of people who thought, we're gonna have to pay back, 20,000 of 80, all of a sudden looked at that 24 weeks and said, we're okay.
Right.
What I've had to do is to remind clients who've gotten it, this is not a free-for-all. So there are regulations on how you can spend the money, PPP versus the EIDL, and take a look at it as we go along. But it's a lot of planning. This is all projections, planning, how is it going to be used, how are you going to justify it, keeping the records for numerous years in one place so that we can quickly show any agency how we've utilized the funding.
So before I throw it to Lewis, let me just ask you one question that just popped in my mind based on what you just said, and that is, this has served in many cases, I would think, as a wake-up call that record keeping and that projections and that strategy of business is something ideally everybody in business should be doing right along the way, and probably necessarily have not. Some folks certainly have created businesses out of great passion, but perhaps did not do a lot of these things. Has that been what you have seen? Again, and it's what you have been, I would assume, sort of preaching all along, but do you find now that people are more up to get it or understand the need for it?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I had somebody approach me that had a $3 million business, had not kept up with their records, were behind in doing their annual tax returns, and was not able to avail themselves of desperately needed PPP and other funding. So I don't think they'll be able to get it despite all of the changes, and the dates are coming up, right, at the end of this month. And I think EIDL is the end of this week. I'm not sure. So I think there are a number of businesses that realize if they had organized their financials, had everything at their fingertips, and really understood that this is a roadmap, right? So your financials are not just an aside. The bookkeeping part is how you run your business. You look at it and say, where are we at? Where were we? And that's how we're going to figure out where we need to get to. And without those tools, you're, driving blind. And so hopefully this is our first and last huge pandemic like this, an economic sort of disaster around the country. But I think it'll be a definite wake-up call. I'm not looking to get business from that per se, but I think people have to understand that even if you hate doing the bookkeeping, you have to find somebody who can do it for you. And really, you don't delegate it away. That's what I always say. You have to understand and make sense of your balance sheet, your income statement, your cash flow. Those are things that make you a better business person. So we're happy to partner with those people who would like our services. I give away a lot of free advice. I chide a lot of people. But I think more than ever, people are seeing that proper accounting, bookkeeping, and record keeping for any organization is paramount.
Thank you, Don. And something I forgot to mention up front, or maybe I did, I just don't remember, but is that you are a Southburyan resident.
I am for almost 2 years, and I love it here. What a great town.
Well, we're happy to have you. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Lewis from CIC. And Lewis, let me just pull up your presentation so that it's there for you to speak to.
Great.
And where'd it go? There it goes. Okay. Sorry. There we go.
There we go. Thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Louis Silva, and I'm a vice president with the Community Investment Corporation. Next slide, please. The Community Investment Corp is a certified development corporation. We've been around for over 47 years. And as a nonprofit organization, we're licensed by the SBA to administer a variety of SBA programs, most of which are community-based organization or community-based lending programs where a client needs capital and they can't get it in the traditional marketplace. And another program that we offer is for the more intuitive borrower, someone looking to purchase a large piece of real estate for their own purposes. Next slide, please. Thank you. There we go. Our mission, quite simply, is to stimulate local economies in Connecticut and Rhode Island. We do that by helping businesses get the capital they need to launch and or grow their business by accessing the SBA's lending resources. Part of my job today is to provide you with an update on a variety of SBA programs that are currently available, and to also provide you with some thoughts on how to manage your cash flow during these turbulent times. Thank you. Regarding the Ppp Flexibility Act, as some of you may know, the Senate recently passed the Flexibility Act to make the program, I'll call it, less restrictive. The act includes several changes, some of which include that all PPP loans granted after June 5th receive a 5-year term. This is a big change. Some businesses could be faced with PPP loans that won't be entirely forgiven. And so the balance that isn't forgiven, you'll actually be able to repay it on a 5-year term. The change there is that prior to June 5th, if you had a PPP balance that wasn't forgiven, you'd have to repay it over a 2-year period, which just thinking ahead could cause some significant cash flow situations. Also, if you did have a PPP loan prior to the June 5th issuance, you could actually go back to your lender and discuss extending the term to 5 years. The SBA is allowing that as long as both parties are mutually in agreement to extend the term. The Act also extends the expense forgiveness period from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. This is probably the biggest and best change to the program. Now businesses, of course, have 24 weeks from the date the loan is granted to utilize the PPP funds in accordance with the forgiveness guidelines. And speaking of forgiveness, the Act provided a reduction in the amount of loan funds that must be spent on payroll to qualify for forgiveness. Now businesses only have to use 60% of those proceeds in order to qualify for forgiveness. And while the payroll guideline was decreased, one of the cool little things that they decided to do was actually increase the maximum amount that could be used on non-payroll costs from 25% to 40%. So clients can now, use 40% of those proceeds to pay for rent and still qualify to get it forgiven, which is fantastic. And the last update I'll share with you regarding the Flexibility Act is that it allows for businesses who do receive forgiveness to defer payroll taxes. Prior to this act being passed, that was a dead no. They weren't able to allow businesses to do that before. So that's a big change as well. So as you can see, these changes do provide businesses with, and pardon the pun, with a little bit more flexibility, especially during this uncertainty. And we're glad to see SBA stepping it up a couple notches here. Next slide, please. Regarding the EIDL and the EIDL Advance program, effective June 15th, the SBA is now accepting EIDL and EIDL Advance requests through their new and improved portal. The EIDL loan could be used to pay debts, payroll, accounts payable, and other bills not already covered by the PPP loan. The program offers very, very attractive terms. They're offering 30-year repayment terms. If you're a for-profit company, the interest rate you would receive on an EIDL loan is 3.75%. If you're a nonprofit and you receive an EIDL loan, you actually get a 2.75%. So again, very attractive terms. Businesses can also request an EIDL advance up to $10,000. The advance is designed to provide emergency economic relief to businesses that are currently experiencing some temporary loss of revenue. The advance doesn't have to be repaid. And in some cases where a business may not get approved for an EIDL loan, they can still get an advance and not have to worry about repaying it. They'll call it a grant. As of the 15th, they haven't provided us with a cutoff date. It's sort of out there until the SBA decides to turn off the faucet, if you will. But for now, definitely it's there for the taking. Next slide, please. In general, obtaining necessary funding is perhaps the greatest challenge most businesses face. The pandemic has proven that having access to capital is absolutely critical to weather the COVID-19 storm. So as a reminder, the PPP loan program, again, ends on June 30th. Unfortunately, the Flexibility Act did not provide additional PPP lending authority or additional funds, nor did it grant lenders additional time to make PPP loans. So I would urge you to act quickly if you think the PPP loan suits your needs for sure. And now that the EIDL loan is back online, I would implore the business community to take a look at that funding option, as the terms are very attractive. Again, you kind of have to look at things not only in the short term, but also in the long term. The 30-year term does provide you with some breathing room in order to sort of grow into your business after this pandemic goes away. And lastly, you'll see I have a link listed there. It's for the Connecticut Statewide Local Initiative Support Corporation. We found them to be a great resource. The site provides the state with timely and relevant COVID-19 resources and is updated pretty regularly, which is nice. There you can find information on funding resources, webinars, and guidance from the state's top firms. We're all about information sharing, and this site does do a great job at sort of aggregating all of the information that's out there on a local basis. Next slide, please. You know, as a nonprofit economic development company, we had to step it up as well. The SBA stepped it up in a big way to assist small business owners and their employees impacted by the shutdown. But despite best efforts to get cash into the hands of small business owners quickly, there are still many businesses in our communities who are reopening and are in need of quick cash to fill an immediate need. So to that end, our company developed what we call the Micro Now program to help provide a quick injection of working capital. And in most cases, if someone has taken advantage of the program, we've actually delivered financing in 2 weeks. Again, really providing a quick injection there. The loan program offers funding up to $15,000 with very repayment terms. If a loan is granted prior to September 27th, the monthly payments are deferred for 6 months rather. And during the deferment period, the SBA will actually step in and make those payments on behalf of the borrower. Of course, it's still subject to the continued funding through the CARES Act, but again, 6 months of payments will be made on behalf of the borrower by the SBA. We do have a few basic requirements. Minimum credit score has to be 675. Business has to be in operation for at least a year, and we can't have any late payments reported in the last 12 months. So if you're interested in chatting about that program, by all means, feel free to reach out. We can certainly assist. But again, we had to pivot because we realized that there was a need for quick money out there, so we decided to do something about it. Next slide, please. Managing cash flow. You know, I wanted to share a few thoughts and/or reminders on managing your cash flow during the pandemic. You know, you want to put your CFO hat in times like these and revisit your expenses. Look to cut variable costs as a way to reduce your cash outflow. Subscriptions, you name it. Those are all little pesky line items that are a nuisance and do drain cash flow, believe it or not. So if you can afford to get rid of them, by all means do so. You'll find that it's extremely helpful, at least in the short term. Extend payables as appropriate to conserve capital. If you typically pay vendors upon receiving an invoice, try working with them and see if they're willing to extend that payable. And at the same rate, chat with your supply chain and see if they're willing to extend any trade debt. Again, that access to capital, if you can't get it through a traditional source or a source such as CIC or CEDF, vendors sometimes are willing to provide you with some trade debt and work with you there. And lastly, some businesses have gotten creative with their revenue streams. I would try to create a new revenue stream based on your opportunities within your work and within your business, or look for ways to modify your current way of doing business. I'll share a couple of experiences, and they're pretty popular. You know, it's that manufacturing company that was manufacturing widgets who saw a decline in their widget production, if you will. And they realized that there was a need for face masks. So they quickly pivoted and started producing face masks for the industry. So those are really creative ways to pivot and to create new revenue streams. And then sort of a very proud accomplishment for one of my personal clients. They're a grocery store, a cafe. And as you can imagine, both were affected tremendously, both on one hand positively and on the other hand negatively. But what they were realizing was the cafe was really struggling, because the grocery store was such a big hit. But at the same rate, they realized that people weren't coming to the store because we had people that could have been, affected by COVID-19 and so forth. So people were kind of shying away from visiting the business. So they quickly leveraged the PPP loan. They decided to make their grocery store digital. So they decided to start selling groceries online. They hired employees to deliver those groceries, just again to get creative and create more revenue for themselves, but also change the way they're doing business, at least in the short run. And who knows, maybe that's something they stick with in the future. But at least in the interim, they definitely took advantage of what was potentially a big pitfall. And Don mentioned this before. While we're talking about managing cash flow, the worst time you want to talk to your banking partners is when you absolutely need capital, right? So I would urge you, if you're back on your feet, if you're steady, have a conversation with your business and with your banking partner. See if they're willing to extend you financing now, or at least pave a way to the future, and see how it is that you can work towards getting some sort of financing from that particular partner at some time in the future. You'd be surprised as to how many banking partners are willing to work with you and open to having a conversation and providing you with some assistance and guidance. That's what we do. We do provide the assistance and the guidance and pave the way for you to become a conventional banking client, if you will. But definitely have those conversations. It doesn't hurt. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kevin.
All right. Thank you very much for that overview, Lewis. And also to you, Don, for your previous comments about this topic. Before I delve into some questions of my own, let me just check our chat box. So if you are on this call and you have a question for either of my guests today, feel free to either type it into the chat box that you see there at the bottom of your screen, or I can unmute you and you can ask your question directly. So if you have something that either pertains directly to your business or just a general question that you've been thinking and wondering about. I think, when again, going back to the survey, but I don't think you need a survey to know this, the overarching challenge, let's say, with this is the uncertainty, the not knowing how long this will go. Today is obviously a big day here in Connecticut because it's phase 2 reopening for those businesses eligible for that. And statistically, they say that with this phase 2, that we are at about 95% of our businesses across the state that are eligible to reopen, which is fabulous, of course. That said, of course, there is all this uncertainty swirling around whether or not we will be able to remain so. Will there be a resurgence? Will there be a reclosing, if you will? Certainly the news that, just came out just as of yesterday that was reported in other areas of the country that opened up sooner that are having record spikes of this pop up is sobering to see. And we hope that that doesn't follow suit everywhere. But the main thing we don't know is what we don't know, and the uncertainty. So, and there's nothing probably that disturbing to someone trying to operate a business and keep things going and afloat is not being able to project, not being able to be confident in what's going to happen. So I know you both in your own areas have certainly touched on this, and I know Lewis in your last slide went through some ideas, but just reflect a little bit more on that and how, as we look at cash flow and look at resources, and again, we can reiterate, that's fine too, but just on this point of what can you do in a moment of such uncertainty to, what is one or two things you can do that are almost assurances or first main steps to being sure you're going to be able to keep going, keep the lights on, and endure this, advice-wise, that you would give. Dawn?
Well, to Lewis's point, I was smiling when he was talking about it. When this hit and we realized we were going to close our office, we stopped spending all money. I mean, period. So we took everything off of auto pay, everything that was on the Amex bill of dues to this and that, a monthly subscription, whatever else we, put on hold. We had just gotten a new copier and spoke with the copier company and said, we're not going to be in the office. So tried to renegotiate everything that we could and really put the focus on having enough cash flow to cover payroll, because without your people, you don't have a company, and focused on what was important. So all of the small little applications we were using, were we going to use Dropbox? Were we going to use Buffer? Were all those things we looked at and made decisions. And that's always a good thing to do. But as any business owner, including myself, things become auto-renewed, and you look at them and say, do we need them? And then really figuring out, and we always knew this, what's your nut, your monthly nut? What does it take you to operate, right? So that you have to have X dollars to turn on the lights, the virtual lights, if the case may be. And that's, payroll, taxes, benefits, rent, and maybe negotiate your rent, all those things. Look at that and use that number to say, this is what we need to have each month. So we do this as a matter of course, but it was a great exercise for us to go through and see if things, if X amount of clients fell to the wayside, would we have that nut covered? And if we didn't, what could we do without, defer, renegotiate to make sure that we were good? Now, we were lucky. All of our clients have stayed on. And also to Lewis's point, we have a client who is a rum distillery, but pivoted very quickly into the hand sanitizer business. So their rum business actually didn't fall off, because I think everyone knows we're all drinking more during the pandemic. But so they picked up and increased the business growth overall. But I think that looking at where you can pivot, where you can cut back, and we did that, and we did it also for our clients, right? So multiply what we did by 35 times, and that's a great exercise to do, not only in this situation, this pandemic and economic downturn, but quarterly. I would say people should really look at that and say, where am I at? Because those creeping costs are what eat away at you.
They're unforeseen, or you don't pay attention to them, because like you said, they just auto go out. And I think anybody can attest to that does all auto banking now, with their personal finances. It's just like you just don't even think about it, what's going out. Lewis, anything you wanted to add? I know you offered a bunch of ideas in the last slide, but any other thoughts that come into mind?
Sure. And I'll reiterate what Dawn said. I mean, she hit the nail on the head. You want to strip your business down to its core and figure out, what you can do to make X every month, and how much it takes to make that X. You want to know, what that equation looks like. And I'd argue that you want to be operating on a break-even point right now, making sure that you can keep your lights on, continue paying your employees, but also continue to keep your business solvent by producing, whatever it is that you produce. So I would certainly suggest creating just a temporary business plan for the next 3, 6, 9 months, even a year, just to make sure that you can kind of keep yourself in check and make sure that you're keeping yourself in line, if you will. The other point that I'll stress is just making sure that you take advantage of every single opportunity to grab a grant, to take advantage of a PPP loan or an EIDL loan, but you have to be smart about it. As Don mentioned, it's not a freebie. It's not free money. The PPP loan is a fantastic solution, but if you feel as though 50 or 60% of the PPP proceeds that you've received aren't going to be forgiven, you have to think about what that's going to do to your cash flow for the next 5 years. And so while it's a fantastic temporary solution, it could be a negative solution after the pandemic has gone and now you're dealing with a large monthly payment. I just had this conversation earlier this week. I had an insurance company that we're financing a piece of real estate for, and they took out a $600,000 PPP loan prior to June 5th. They took advantage of it because it was there. If they don't deploy those funds, because they took out the loan before June 5th, they're going to have to pay back a $600,000 PPP loan on a 2-year repayment schedule. As you can imagine, that is a huge monthly repayment, almost $33,000. So those are the things you want to keep thinking about. While you're looking at these solutions, make sure that it works in the interim, but make sure that it doesn't put a hindrance on your future performance as well. Because this will all go away. It's just a matter of how do we stay put? How do we kind of keep creeping along on a break-even perspective? And if you can crank out some profitability, great. absolutely, God bless you. But you definitely want to make sure that you're thinking about this from all angles.
Kevin, can I say one thing to
course.
Louis, that I'm sure he tells this to his clients all the time. So you can't borrow your way out of your problems. You can't borrow your way to profitability. And people have to realize that this money coming back, you're going to have cash flow to repay it. So it's very important. People are starting to think it's a windfall. I can do anything with this money. There are limitations to what you can do, what you can pay with them. And then you have to figure out, in doing your business plan, your projections, how are you going to, the debt repayment, how are you going to be able to do that? So I think that's huge. And people who seeing this type of money coming in going, it's great now. I had somebody who said they wanted to spend it to pay off a loan. And, we had a conversation of, with the EIDL, it's current liabilities, but if you're talking about long-term debt, maybe that's not covered. You don't want to have problems, so be very careful. And I've gotten advice from CEDF and other people as well as to what can be covered, what can't. But again, that debt repayment, figuring out what that is going to do to your cash flow, back to that, is key. I know you want to say something, Kevin. Yeah.
Well, I had a question, because you're talking about what it can and cannot be used for. So let me ask you this. Is that what it can and cannot be used for if you're seeking forgiveness? Or if you don't care whether or not you have to pay this back, with a little interest, then is it open to use it the way you want?
Yeah, pretty much. At that juncture, it's a company leveraging low cost money that's out there for the taking. Granted, the SBA has put these programs out there to be used if you need it, and obviously for its purpose, but at the same time, they haven't restricted the inverse of that, right? So we have seen a lot of companies just say, hey, this, especially for the EIDL loan, 3.75% over 30 years, it's practically nothing. So, people are taking advantage of $500,000 loans through EIDL for the purposes of just having cash set aside. So I would argue, if you are in a situation where things are good, business is solvent, why not? Again, you don't want to be in a position to request for capital when you absolutely don't, or when you absolutely need it and you can't get it. It's terrible. But again, debt is not the answer. You want to make sure you have a good balance of that.
To piggyback on that, and I'm just kind of putting my developer hat on, let's say, because obviously a lot of what we've all been doing, certainly the business community in the forefront, has been in almost a triage situation, trying to prevent the bleed until things can start to get back to cash flow. But there are some businesses, as we indicated earlier, who are not ill affected, and in some cases have grown, out of this. It's a disruption factor, and it just depends on, you mentioned, for example, alcohol. So most package stores, for example, are doing more business than they did before. I've talked to grocery stores that have done more business than they did before. Some are just either call them recession proof, call them, they're just impacted differently, and in some cases positive ways. So what I'm wondering is with my developer hat on, Connecticut was very deliberate in not in allowing new construction and construction in general to not be considered ineligible. That it was eligible businesses to remain open. Not all the states did that. I think that was in part to be a development-friendly state, let's say, to try to keep things going. And I know there's been projects here in town that have kept going because of that ability to do so. To piggyback on the idea of whether it's with loans or whether it's not with loans, is there perhaps an opportunity for some to grow their business? Let's take somebody who wants to do a startup. You wouldn't think that somebody wanting to start a new business would do so in this climate. But yet, to your point of the pivoting, maybe they see an opportunity that's not being fulfilled, and they want to go for it. If we end on an optimistic note of growth and development, is there any good news that could come out of this?
I'll start. I mean, I think that there will be new businesses that have seen opportunities and will grow. And I think there's definitely going to be a lot of adaptation and change, especially in the real estate market. So you can just drive down any street, including our own in Southbury, see who's open, who's not, who doesn't look like they will open up again, who has people waiting in line. So I think a lot of the restaurants that are nice and bright and airy, I went to one of them on Sunday for the first time with a friend, sat outside, and it was fantastic. Obviously, that has to do with weather and the size. There are some places that are so small that based upon the requirements of the state, if you have a restaurant that you're only able to have 4 tables open, you're not going to be able to last long unless you've got a great business for takeout. And I think that there'll be a change. So I think that some people will look to have offices in our area. Maybe they were in a larger city and can get a better price on real estate here and make it PPE friendly now, thinking about that going forward in terms of construction and saying this is a great opportunity. I know that I have a number of clients, colleagues, friends who are leaving Manhattan, right? Their offices have closed down because it's so constricted, the space. They'll never be able to be PPE compliant. So
Right.
I think the bucolic nature of a lovely town like ours, the opportunity for growth, all of the services being here is really something that would attract people. But again, there's going to be a new normal, and there are definitely going to be winners and losers in our state. And there's going to be a big difference between the small towns that we're in and a Hartford, a New Haven, even to some extent a Danbury. But, you know, what is it? Adapt or die. I mean, that's it. And we are Yankees. We're hardy, and we're going to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Sure. So, you know, I'll speak from an organizational perspective. We're certainly looking at startups and new business opportunities as they present themselves. We realize that there is a lot of opportunity, especially given today's. So we're optimistic, and we're definitely along for the ride, if you will. If a business is looking to take a risk, as long as the plan makes sense, you know, we'll take a look at partnering and helping that business start out. And there's no doubt that existing businesses who have found a need will pivot and look to capitalize on that need. You know, I have a good story to tell with regards to a borrower in our portfolio. He used to provide rigging solutions for sort of acrobatic gyms around the country, and he realized that gyms are shut down. What do I do? But he quickly pivoted and realized that he has all the tools that he needs to fabricate plexiglass dividers. And so as businesses start to open up and they realize that they now need to have PPE, if you will, and plexiglass dividers to protect themselves, he has now seen a huge influx of business that he never had, and it has far exceeded what he ever did on the gym side of things. So, you know, this is something that he's capitalizing on, he's taking full advantage of, and he's received funding in order to take advantage of this. So, you know, those opportunities are out there, and I would implore people to take advantage of them as they present themselves.
That's a great example, Louis. Thank you for that. And I think we are seeing very creative ways that companies and individuals are pivoting to meet the moment. So, well, with that, I want to thank both of you for joining me, Louis, Dawn. I thank you so much. I'm going to share for our guests that are with us everybody's contact information. It's there on the screen for you. As I said, you can jot it down now, or I will send out a information one sheet that kind of recaps anything we've referenced during the webinar. But there is all of our information on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any follow-up questions that we didn't get to today, or just want to inquire about their services, of course. And that's our webinar today. Thank you to everyone for joining me. And,
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Next week, We will be back hopefully Wednesday at noon for our Zoom at noon Wednesday webinar. So if you have enjoyed this, all the previous, this one and all the previous ones have been recorded and are available on the business tab of the Southbury Town website, and as well as registration for our future ones to come. So with that, thank you everybody. Have a great day and stay safe.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, good seeing you.
Likewise.